I want to start off by saying this was recorded on February 25th and edited on the following weekend. This video in no way supports the Russian invasion. I'm only trying to explain how we got here. Also note that this video takes the history of 3 nations across 200 years and condenses it down to a simple YouTube video. I also want to say that what is happening in Ukraine is saddening and my heart goes out to the Ukrainian people. Before I begin, I want to take a moment of silence for those who've already lost their lives and for those who will lose their lives before the end of this conflict. Thank you, and enjoy. In order to understand what's happening today, you have to understand the history of Russia, its relationship with Ukraine, and the history of the United States and its relationship with the US. Russia, for better or worse, has always drifted towards having a despotic leader coupled with a strong surveillance state to suppress any political opposition. Whether it's the imperial czars, the Soviet premier, or Putin today, Russia always manages to fall into the same pattern of having a strong, powerful leader and, for lack of a better word, tyrant. Putin's rise in political control is not unique within the grand scope of Russian history. If not him, some other hooker would have made their way up to the top position in all the land. Russia's government tends to exert a very strong force on its people. The government tries very hard to promote political unity and goes out of its way to depose anything or anyone that it views as a threat to that governmental power. The most recent example of this was the poisoning of Alexei Navalny in 2020. Keep these two things in mind when thinking about the relationship of Russia and others. Russia and Ukraine. Russia's relationship with Ukraine is complicated and stretches back over a millennia. They overall have a very similar culture, and the Russian and Ukrainian languages are 90% intelligible to one another. They have the same historical point of origin, and these birth ties hold them together. However, Ukraine has spent long periods both under Russian control and long periods being independent. These stretches of independence have allowed Ukraine to develop their own unique culture while still maintaining their Slavic identity that binds them to Russia. Russia's last period of ownership of Ukraine began in 1922 and lasted until 1991, which was during the USSR. During this period, Ukraine was frequently the target of abuse. The best examples include, excuse my Russian, the Holodomor, Jesus, or for everyone else, the man-made famine that targeted the Soviet Republic of Ukraine from 1932 to 1933. This famine killed 3.5 million Ukrainians unnecessarily. There was also the large displacement of Ukrainians into far-flung sections of the USSR as a means of cultural and population control. The Russian language and culture began to become the de facto standard across the USSR by the 1940s, and there was a concerted push against the Ukrainian identity. This was not the only time that this has happened either. In the century prior, Ukraine under Imperial Russian rule was subject to Russification. This ended with Ukraine's independence from the Russian Empire during World War I, only to be sucked right back into the USSR with mixed results as previously mentioned. When the USSR collapsed, Ukraine gained its independence and began to seek a more permanent way to secure that independence. The relationship it had with Russia had been like that of an abusive boyfriend, and Ukraine was tired of being abused. When the opportunity to join NATO arose, Ukraine knew that it was the best decision for them to hopefully secure permanent independence. But before we get into that, let's pivot a little bit and take a look at NATO and the United States and where they all come into this, because that's an important part of the story as well. As mentioned before, Russia historically has fallen into having strong leadership with an even stronger surveillance state. Russia's track record is not known to be very free and open. It's not as bad as the CCP, but they're not some great free nation either. People tend to be pretty tight-lipped about the oppression, and from an outsider's perspective, it seems to be more of an inconvenience to everyday life, but in some places it can turn deadly. This image is in direct contrast with the fact that the United States was founded with freedom of expression at its core. It's not the only thing the U.S. was founded on. However, it has become a huge piece of the identity of the United States. Our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, restricts the U.S. government's power and is very explicit that that power of the government is provided by the consent of the people, not the other way around. Now, I do want to mention that the groups that have had governmental power in the past were very small and few in number, but gradually the United States has expanded those rights to include many adults over the age of 18, regardless of race, gender, sex, or economic status. One thing that sets the United States apart is our limits to the government's power and our freedom to criticize the government without fear of retaliation. This identity of freedom is the backbone of the nation's identity and puts the values of the many forms of the Russian government in direct opposition with each other. These differing views led to a number of political tensions. When the USSR had recovered from its devastation caused by World War II, it rose to become a power to rival that of the United States and ushered in the Cold War. To combat the growing threat of the Soviet Union, the United States created NATO, which was essentially a military alliance. Basically, if one member of NATO was attacked, the others would join in and they would fight together. NATO was a tool to contain the spread of communism and the reach of the USSR. Communism was a real threat back then. It's a very alluring idea, spread the wealth around. Who doesn't want some extra free cash? However, by the 1990s, the Soviet Union had succumbed to internal rot and external pressures, and they finally broke apart. Ukraine gained its independence, and Russia had emerged as a weak and vulnerable state. The United States understood that this new weakened Russia was only temporary and sought to take full advantage of this and extend NATO to the place where it is today. For most of the former Soviet republics, including Ukraine, the possibility of joining NATO benefits them by keeping Russia from being able to walk right back into their lives. NATO grew in size and continued to grow further eastward until its borders reached Ukraine, who, given the opportunity to join NATO, was excited, but due to Russian interference was kept from joining in 2008. The thought of Ukraine joining NATO gave Russia heart palpitations. It's a problem for Russia for a multitude of reasons. Ukraine joining NATO would effectively bring an extension of the United States military into the vicinity on the borders of Russia. It would also make the eventual desire to reconquer Ukraine almost impossible due to now having official military backing of the United States. Russia felt the pressure. They're already on the verge of reestablishing themselves in regional supremacy. They've already taken part of Ukraine with the Crimea in 2014, and have also done similar maneuvers with South Ossetia, or part of Georgia, back in 2008. And both of those incidents went down with not a lot of international action. And I mean that not as in there wasn't condemnation from the international community, but ultimately no maneuvers were taken against Russia physically at that time, if that makes any sense. They feel the timing is right. Putin is not really getting any much younger. He's most likely wants to establish his legacy and push Russia across the threshold into being a superpower once again. This move to take over Ukraine entirely is very bold and almost seems unlikely to have ever happened at all. This sentiment of uncertainty has come from all sides and all angles, in the United States, in Russia, and in the Ukraine. People were kind of unsure that this would have happened in the first place. And it's kind of shocking again that it's happening at this point now. As to how long it will last or what the aftermath will be, it's still too soon to say. For the Ukrainians, this is the last thing that they want. They've already become accustomed to being, quote, part of the West and the freedoms that that has allowed. And so being put under Russian subjugation, even if, let's say, that they would be treated completely fair like all the Russian other individuals, is not the greatest of possibilities for these people. In addition, they really haven't had a very good relationship as far as being treated completely fair under Russian systems time and time again. And so this really aggravates this entire situation. And to add insult to injury, of course, this is a full-scale invasion. And so the lives lost and the time spent resisting Russia and all of these things will add up to basically make this where almost it is an impossibility at this point that the Ukrainians will willingly want to give in. And so for the vast majority of Ukrainians, I think that this is a cementing moment for them and their country, where they truly push against ever really wanting to unite with Russia in any sort of capacity or way. They may appreciate their similarities in culture, but outside of that context, there will be probably a very large-scale disgust and distaste for Russia and all things Russian that could be pushed out against for at least the next few years, if not decades of history. The most shocking piece of all is the speed at which things seem to be progressing. In 2 weeks from now, there may not be a Ukraine to even feel a certain type of way. It seems very dire at this point in time. But again, this is February 25th. So if you're listening to this way in the future, you can laugh at me if I'm totally wrong, or congratulate me if I'm totally right, which I hope I'm not totally right. That's horrible. It's a horrible thought. Ugh, I feel gross. Anyways, what does this all mean for the United States? And what I really mean is, why is this any of our business? Well, should these aggressive actions by Russia be left unchecked, it could possibly lead to more issues down the road. Basically, it sets a negative precedent around the globe that the only thing stopping a nation from taking over its neighbor is having enough weaponry. This could potentially thaw a number of frozen international conflicts leading to God knows what. We might end up in a war in a very roundabout way, regardless. In addition, war is hell. People die, and it leads to a number of unintentional hardships for all parties involved. This move by Russia has the potential to destabilize the entire globe and usher in a new way of life for everyone. Or maybe it won't. Maybe the sanctions will work. Maybe other countries don't want the same condemnation as Russia, and life continues on like it always does. At this point, it's anyone's guess. However, this is quite possibly the closest we've been to World War III in a long time. And it has all the right triggers. Let's just hope and pray it doesn't get to this point. But if the United States sits idly by, which it looks like we're doing, unfortunately, Ukraine might disappear. And that's a pretty sad thought. And the implications for that across the globe is even worse. I don't even want to think what could happen to places like Taiwan or Yemen or Palestine or any other place that seems to be in a very precarious spot already. Sorry this video is so crammed full of information. Like I said before, I had a lot of ground to cover, and I don't want to make this video too long. Comment below and tell me what you think about the situation. If you feel like I missed something important, or you think my opinions or interpretations of history suck, let me know in the comments as well. I look forward to reading your terrible opinions too. Anyways, peace, love, and all that stuff. Thanks for watching.